Hey everybody, Coach Melissa here at Goddard's Fit Body Boot Camp. Today is Monday, February 5th, and I am here for another edition of Nutrition News. And today's topic actually comes to me after a member here at Goddard's Fit Body Boot Camp, and a good friend of mine sent me a link yesterday to a news article through Global News all about food addiction, signs that you might be a food addict. And I thought this is the perfect conversation to have here on Nutrition News. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dive right in and we're going to talk about food addiction. So what exactly is, a food addiction? Many behaviors qualify as addictions, things that you feel overwhelmingly compelled to do despite what the consequence might be. So let's talk about food addiction and what that might be. So addiction is a complicated thing. It's social, it's motivational, it's emotional. Sometimes genetic factors can all interact to create an addiction experience for somebody. An addictive substance alone, so food alone, does not create an addiction. However, some things for more people can be more addictive than others. A lot of people often joke, I'm a video game addict, I'm a Facebook addict, I'm an ice cream addict, things like that. But real addiction, that's something different, and it's important that we understand the difference. So an addiction is an overpowering craving to repeatedly engage in an activity that provides temporary relief but has terrible consequences. It's something that you feel compelled to do, even if it's going to harm you long term. So to count as an addiction, there must also be a withdrawal, and withdrawal are, feelings of discomfort, of distress, of intense cravings when that addictive substance or behavior is taken away or stopped. So food addiction involves a regular compulsion to eat and or consume various or particular foods, even though you know logically that those foods are going to harm you. Whether it's because, they're unhealthy foods, like they're high in sugar, or because they will make you sick, or they're going to, cause you to become obese over the long term. An addiction means a regular compulsion to eat or consume them anyways, even though logically, it's going to have terrible results. Now, an occasional big meal, right, or a splurge or an indulgence, not an addiction. Regularly eating so much and so fast, so rapidly that you end up feeling bloated, possibly even nauseated, but you're unable to stop yourself, potentially that could be a food addiction. After having a couple of cookies, really, or any, potentially addictive food, sugary usually food, a non-addict won't really feel any different about it. They'll feel indifferent about having any more. They don't need more. Whereas with an addict, a food addict, it's much different. Addicts become completely single-minded in this pursuit of their hit. So it's just like any other addiction. The food that they're after is like a hit. So eating, a couple of cookies or any potentially addictive food for them sets up like an abnormal reaction, and they want more and they want more and more until they are physically unable to swallow any more. If you are not an addict, it's not that you're a master of self-control or anything like that. It's just that you don't have that insatiable appetite for more. A food addict can be pretty much anybody. Like it could be somebody who is overweight but always trying a new diet. It could be somebody who eats beyond fullness at dinner after snacking on junk food all day to help deal with stress, for example. It could be someone who's very thin, who never eats enough and is hungry all the time because they are afraid of getting fat. So in this case, the hit is not eating. So it actually works kind of against what you would normally think. Their hit is not eating. They're addicted to not eating because of the fear that they have of becoming overweight. Food addict could be someone who's lonely and has nothing else to do really in their spare time except watch TV, eat bags of chips, that kind of thing. It could be somebody who snacks all day to ease boredom of any different type of situation. It could be a perfectionist who is never, quite satisfied with their body. So they are addicted, and this is a thing, they are addicted to so-called healthy foods or clean eating and, never allow themselves, a cheat, that kind of thing. It could be a person suffering from different disease like heart disease, diabetes, who gets quite resistant or quite defensive when presented with different treatment approaches or ideas. Some food addicts eat too much, and some food addicts don't eat enough. So for a food addict, food provides the fun, entertainment, maybe control, reassurance, or love that might be missing in their life elsewhere. Food may also help to numb difficult emotions like fear, sadness, things like that. Some people, like I said, even have an addiction to restricting themselves from specific foods. So here's the problem, though. It's really difficult to determine something like food addiction, okay? Because you need food to live. So somebody that's, addicted to gambling or addicted to like heroin, for example, they don't need that to live. But you need food to live. So at what point does a big appetite end and food addiction begin? And can you become addicted to something that you actually need? So it's important to remember that researchers, experts agree that addiction is a pattern of behavior, and this is characterized by near constant searches for a hit. So you cannot stop thinking about it, and it's not necessarily that you need to eat. We all need to eat. It's that you need to eat that specific food, and that you cannot relax or you cannot focus until you get that specific hit. Characterized by an intense compulsion or desire for that specific substance or behavior. Withdrawal symptoms, having those when your hit is taken away. So if you, try to go a few days or a week without that specific food, then you go into withdrawal, then you might be addicted to that certain food and then needing more and more intense hits as your tolerance develops to that specific food over time. So really, by this definition, nearly anything, including water, or various foods, could be an addiction. But this is when we're talking about like when you become dependent on this specific item or this specific food. And it becomes less and less, substance dependence becomes less about the high and more about preventing the negative feelings that come from staying away from it. So the ability to get pleasure from the food becomes more difficult because smaller amounts of the same food aren't as rewarding. So that means you need more and more and more in order to get that same level of satisfaction that you used to get from less. So as your tolerance, as you need more and more and more, it means you're becoming addicted to it. You're becoming dependent on that food in order to fully function. So here are some symptoms that might occur within a year of becoming dependent upon certain substances, certain foods. The first symptoms is using more over time. So as I said, your tolerance increases over time. So let's say you used to buy groceries, you would take them home, eat a snack, go on with your day. Now you buy groceries and you have to eat all day long because all the food is there. So you have to eat all day long until suddenly you've gone through half of what you've bought in one day. So you are using more over time. Another symptoms is that you have withdrawal. So you have to have this substance in order to avoid withdrawal symptoms. So let's say you eat processed snacks to correct being tired and or depressed. Like classic example for a lot of people is pop to avoid being tired. Maybe they don't drink coffee, they don't drink tea, but they do drink pop. So they need that. They need that hit. They feel like they need that hit in order to stay awake, especially mid-afternoon. Some people, they have anxiety and they feel like they need to eat something crunchy like chips or crackers to calm themselves down. And they're afraid if they stop using this food or this pop to deal with those emotions, they're not going to have anything else to turn to and they're not going to have a way to deal with what's going on. Symptom number 3, I use more than I intend. So one bowl of ice cream turns into 2 bowls or 3 bowls. You start with a handful of chips and you end up eating the whole bag, and you really, truly, literally cannot stop yourself from doing it. Another symptom, perhaps you're trying or you have tried to cut back. You want to reduce your intake of this specific food and you've tried but haven't been successful. So perhaps you've tried to cut down or stop eating chips or drinking pop, for example, but it's always on your mind, and you find a way to sabotage or defeat yourself, even making a special trip to the store, completely out of your way to get those chips or to get that chocolate or whatever the case may be. Spending time pursuing, using, or recovering from this use. So spending a lot of time on the activities necessary to obtain, to get the substance or to recover from its effects. So maybe you have a list of things you need to do on Saturday. You'll go to the store, you'll buy groceries, and spend the rest of the day eating what you bought, then taking antacids, and then sleeping off the effects of what you bought, and not really getting anything else done on your list, because once you had the groceries and they were in your house, they were calling to you and you had to eat them all day long. Another symptom of perhaps having a dependence on a certain substance or on a certain food, you miss or you give up important social, occupational, or recreational activities because of this addiction that you have or this dependence that you have on food. For example, you come home to eat and then you're too full or too uncomfortable or too tired from what you ate to then go exercise or to go meet with friends, or you avoid going out with friends to social events because of the food that's going to be there, and you feel like you will be unable to control yourself. That is signs of dependence on food or food addiction as well. Continuing to use and or abuse this food or this substance despite knowing that it's giving you recurrent or chronic physical or physiological problems. So you may feel like you may have a lot of knee pain, and you've been told that losing 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds will relieve that knee pain. However, you continue to eat sugary, highly processed or packaged foods, even though if you stop that and you start to lose some of that body fat, then there would be a lot less pressure on your knees. And then, of course, after you do continue to binge eat like that, you can't lay down, let's say, because of pain. Perhaps there's like regurgitation going on into your esophagus, or your blood pressure is high from doing this, or you're embarrassed, or you're afraid about being in social situations because of overeating. And yet you continue, this food addiction has you continuing to eat in this way. You really can't stop yourself. So how does this happen? Like, how does this develop? How does this food addiction become such a thing? And there's a lot of different reasons that some people could struggle with this. And one of them is fear. Might fear that eating a reasonable amount of food, or might fear getting fat, might fear experiencing uncomfortable emotions that they might, have to face and have to deal with head on if they don't do it through food. What else influences chronic food addiction? Chronic overeating. So eating too much of highly processed or packaged foods can stimulate these feel-good chemicals in your brain, and regular binging creates this dependency on this high. You become dependent. There's been many, many studies that prove that you become dependent on a highly processed diet in order to feel normal and experience withdrawal symptoms when you don't eat foods like that. What else might create these food dependencies or food addictions? Being restricted. So what if somebody told you that you could not, starting tomorrow, you can never have ice cream again, or you could never have pop again, or you could never have chips again? Most people, when they're told that, when they're starting a nutrition plan, Monday or next week or something, they spend the weekend or the week before, the day before, binging, eating all the food in sight or eating all their favorite foods. Because they feel like they're never going to get it again. And so this is why usually diets, dieting, restricting yourself from something, usually inevitably will eventually lead to binges, either before or after the diet, before it begins or after it ends. Stress is another common factor as to why this happens. Various forms of stress can trigger addiction. Binging plus or trying to restrict certain foods and stress is a winning combination for food addiction. Addiction can lie dormant in many people when things are going really well, but then when trouble strikes, usually the first thing to go for most people is good nutrition, and food addiction rears its ugly head. Depression can often change someone's appetite, their hunger, their fullness signals, as well as sleep patterns. And normally quality or good sleep can help us manage urges better. Sleep is a good way to continue with your willpower. And if you're not getting enough, then again, you're not going to be able to resist these urges or these cravings as well as you could otherwise. Some people who struggle with food addiction aren't as tuned into their hunger awareness cues or their fullness cues. So they feel like they're hungry all the time when maybe that's not it. Maybe they're bored, or maybe they're just thirsty, or maybe they're tired, or maybe they're stressed, and they don't really notice when they're eating when they've actually had enough or when their body is satisfied. Those cues do not turn on very well in their brains. And another reason that this can become a thing, that food addiction is becoming more and more prevalent, this could have started way back when you were young. If this is how you were told to cope with stress, or if this is how, your parents, if you were crying, they gave you food, they gave you a cookie, they gave you whatever to try to calm you down. This can go back years and years and years. It's just instinctual for you. So there's a lot of different reasons that people can become dependent on food. And then, of course, it doesn't help either that a lot of the foods like ice cream, burgers, candy, melted cheese, butter, oily sauces, these are all foods that are designed to release those feel-good chemicals in your brain, so your brain wants them and wants more and more of them in order to feel better and be satisfied. So a lot of people, they're not binging on broccoli, and they're not binging on, beans and quinoa and things that might be more healthy for you. They're binging on this food that is designed to have you crave more because of what's in it, the sugar, the oil, the starches, the fat, that kind of thing. So having that so readily available to us everywhere we go now, they have these combinations of ingredients everywhere that we go. Of course it makes sense because it's more readily available to us now, which it never used to be before. Other things, when we're talking about this, other things that we could, that could make food addictive, is the quantity. So it's easy to get, everything is supersized nowadays. So it's, you go to the movie theaters and you get the big bucket of popcorn, or you go out for dinner and everything is much more oversized portions than what you could possibly eat. So again, your hunger cues or your fullness cues are not really turned on. What's normal, what's accepted within a group. So if it's accepted in the group to overeat, the group that you're with, or if it's expected in the group that you have to clean your plate, you're not allowed to leave anything on your plate, which again can go back to childhood. It's unlikely that behavior is going to stop if that's what is expected. If you look at smoking, right? Many people cut down on smoking or quit smoking when jurisdictions outlawed smoking in public places or restaurants or bars. If they wanted to continue to go out, then they couldn't smoke there anymore. And it's kind of the same with food, with eating. If the people that you're hanging out with are always overeating or eating certain foods, then you're more likely to as well. And if you grew up in a family where you couldn't leave the table until your plate was cleared, and the plate had so much more on it than you could possibly ever need to eat in the first place, this is where it begins, and this is how it can be perpetuated over time and through generations. Because if you grew up in that kind of home and now you're being that kind of parent, you're doing the same thing to your kids. So keeping that in mind. So food addiction, it's tricky. And then how do you treat it? Like, now that you're aware of this, right? How do you treat it? So if you feel out of control with certain foods or in certain situations, you probably are out of control in certain situations or with certain foods. Your behavior depends heavily on your social and your environmental factors, who you're hanging out with and where you're hanging out. So sometimes you can adjust your behavior by adjusting your routine or adjusting your environment, avoiding certain people, places, and things that might trigger these addictive tendencies. using social pressures to your advantage. Addicts don't like to use their drug with sober people staring at them. So hanging out with different people or in different places where this is not expected or not accepted. The more available and socially acceptable an addictive substance is, the easier it's going to be to get hooked. So making that harder to get is a big deal. And remembering that food does not help to resolve emotions. Emotions are not a bad thing. Everybody has emotions. Everybody goes through stuff. Everybody has hard days. Everybody has hard times. Emotions are pretty useful. They have a purpose and they indicate that something is out of balance in your life. Food is often used as a coping mechanism for these emotions that we can't handle or that feel intolerable to us. But once that food rush wears off, you're left with the very same emotional problems that you started with, plus the additional problems that this food addiction has now brought into your life. So a lot of food addictions come from uncontrolled stress, uncontrollable stress, combined with trying to restrict yourself from certain foods. If these two factors can be controlled, so paying attention again to the stress that you have in your life and what you're eating, when you're eating, why you're avoiding certain foods. If you are, you may have a better handle on being able to control this food addiction. There's also, appetite suppressants out there, different drugs that people take to eliminate, eating addictive foods. And that happens, but it also opens up new problems like then undereating or nutrient deficiencies, not getting enough of what you need because you're getting, these appetite suppressants and not actual real food that has vitamins, minerals, nutrients in it. So, paying attention to what you're eating, when you're eating, why you're eating once again, and the source of your nutrition. Cravings die as a side effect of changing your life and your identity. Medication is at best only a partial and a temporary solution. So as with everything else, as with any other type of addiction, whether that's smoking, gambling, drinking, drugs, usually getting to the root of the issue, the root of the concern, the root of why you're coping with food, why you are numbing things with food, is how you're going to get through and get to the other side of something like a food addiction. While you cannot choose to be addicted to something, you can choose your recovery. You can choose to want to recover. You can choose to want to be better. Some people try to go cold turkey. Some people feel like it's easier to give up entirely than to try to, wean yourself off or cut yourself down. Recovery from addiction means having the choice and having the ability to choose what's best for you. It may be different for everybody else, but if it works for you and you're getting help and recovering from it, then that's what matters the most. It usually means, if you're gonna deal with food addiction, it usually means that you're gonna have to be willing to face some discomfort, just like any other addiction. That is often the way it is. So just some information for you about food addiction, how you may recognize some of the symptoms, how you may be able to reach out and get some help for that. And if that's you, if you are at that point where you're thinking, I am addicted, I do have a food addiction, this is probably something to talk to a doctor about and to go to a professional about, because it might be food right now, but if you have that addictive personality, then it could be an addiction to something else down the road. So figuring out where that's rooted in, what's really going on, why you're trying to cope with food, and making sure that you are not harming yourself further. A lot of people feel like, a food addiction or a sugar addiction is not as bad as being addicted, to smoking or to drinking or to drugs or something like that. But there are a lot of long-term serious health effects from being addicted to sugar or to not eating. It goes both ways. There are a lot of long-term serious physical and mental health negative effects to having a food addiction, whether it's you eat too much or you don't eat enough. So looking deep into yourself and finding out what's really going on and why, you're using food as your crutch is probably where you need to go. If I can help in any other way when it comes to this kind of thing, please reach out, let me know. There's a lot of information you can get online. There's Food Addicts Anonymous, actually, so you can look that up. There's a lot of information you can get about food addiction online as well from different experts. So thanks for listening. Happy Monday afternoon to everybody. February 5th. Food addiction is what we were talking about today. I will be back next week, February 12th, and we will talk about something else. Have a great day. Thanks for listening, everybody.